Hey guys, tonight, we journey into the scorching sands of ancient Nubia, where the desert winds whisper strange secrets through acacia trees, and the sun sets over ochre hills, like a kiln cooling after a long day's work. You trudge into a sleepy village, just as twilight falls your sandals caked with dust, the dry air tugging at your throat like cotton gauze. Everything smells like earth sweat, and something you can't quite place, yeasty, sour, almost alive. You hear low drums in the distance, slow and soft like a heartbeat, and someone is chanting near a pit lined with ceramic jars. These aren't for storage. They bubble. They fume. You lean in and squint. Is that beer? It doesn't look like the clear, frothy stuff you know. This is cloudy, thick as stew, and it's glowing orange in the firelight. A young boy stirs it with a wooden paddle, taller than he is, while a goat observes you with contemptuous wisdom. Welcome to your first taste of history's strangest happy hour. This is not a place where drinks come with umbrellas or frosted mugs. This is beer, as medicine beer, as ritual beer, as something sacred. And you weary traveler are about to learn that the people who brewed it may have been centuries ahead of their time, long before the word antibiotic ever existed. Of course, you'll need to survive the smell first. Spoiler alert, it's not subtle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, post your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when in the world we drift off together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find a quiet corner near a mud brick wall and lower yourself to the ground. The sand still radiates heat from the day, and your body aches in a way that's almost pleasant. Nearby, a woman carries a large ceramic jug wrapped in cloth. She moves with the grace of someone who's done this 1,000 times, her every step balancing both the weight and importance of what she holds. The villagers gather around her not with the rowdy anticipation of modern bargoers, but with reverence, the kind reserved for holy men or very convincing herbalists. The jug is placed on a woven mat, and a priest, or maybe just a really persuasive uncle, steps forward. His robe is patched with dust, and he wears a necklace made from bone and fired clay. He doesn't speak much, but his presence commands attention. One hand cups the top of the jug. The other lifts a bundle of dried grasses tied with twine, which he slowly dips into the vessel. Then he lifts it to the mouth of a small child with a swollen knee and a cough you can hear from across the circle. The child drinks. Everyone watches. You hold your breath, not out of concern, but because the smell is hitting you now. A heady mix of fermented millet-wet clay and something sharply metallic that clings to your nose like an unwanted memory. You wonder how this strange ancient brew came to be. Was it discovered by accident, left out too long in the sun? Or was it part of something deeper? Something learned, refined, passed down, like a secret handshake between generations. Historians still argue whether the Nubians knew the full scope of what they were doing. Did they understand that the mold they encouraged in their grain was producing tetracycline, a powerful antibiotic? Or were they simply repeating what worked guided by observation and divine intuition? Either way, the results were real. Modern scientists have confirmed that bones from Nubian mummies contain traces of this very antibiotic absorbed over time from regular consumption of these medicinal beers. but let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, you're still just a curious outsider watching a ritual that looks part pharmacy, part feast, and part group therapy. There's music in the air again, soft flutes now played by two boys sitting cross-legged near the fire. Their cheeks puff out, and their eyes flutter shut as they slip into a rhythm older than writing. You catch yourself swaying slightly, lulled by the warmth, the music, and the slow gurgle of clay pots doing their microbial magic. A woman next to you hands you a small bowl made from half a gourd. Inside is the cloudy beer. You hesitate. She nods. You sip. It tastes like someone took oatmeal rainwater and a hint of mushroom and left it out during a sandstorm. And yet, there's something soothing about it. It coats your throat in a strange, creamy way. Your lips tingle slightly. And maybe it's the exhaustion or the heat or the way the villagers are looking at you now with sleepy acceptance. But you think you feel a little better already. The night deepens. Stars bloom overhead, sharp and brilliant in the clean desert sky. The village grows quiet. You close your eyes, and somewhere deep inside those clay pots, the Streptomyces bacteria go on quietly, working fighting infections, before infections even have names. The morning in Nubia doesn't arrive so much as it seeps into your bones. The sun doesn't rise gently. It launches itself into the sky like it forgot it was late. Light floods the clay walls and bounces off the sand, making you squint, even with your eyes closed. You sit up slowly, your back sore from sleeping on woven mats, and your mouth dry, as if your tongue spent the night wrestling a desert lizard. But the village is already alive again. Chickens squawk. Someone's goat is protesting its leash like a tiny drama queen. And back near the fermentation pit, the same barefoot boy from last night is at it again, stirring the thick, bubbling sludge with his paddle. You blink hard, trying to process what you're seeing. Today's brew is darker. Someone has tossed in a handful of what looks like wild dates. They sink like stones. Women add pinches of ground-up bark, and something that smells suspiciously like week-old garlic. A man walks past carrying a bundle of reeds, each dipped in ash and tied with twine. He's humming to himself, not in joy, but in focus. You start to understand that this isn't just beer-making, it's ritual. Sacred, habitual, and oddly scientific, though they wouldn't use that word. Every step matters. Every ingredient has its place. Every motion is part of an invisible script, passed down through generations of trial, and possibly a few stomach aches. Today, the priest or Uncle you, still aren't sure, has a painted gourd in his hands. He walks from house to house, muttering a prayer as he sprinkles water onto doorways. You think it's holy water, until you catch the scent-fermented mash again, maybe mixed with herbs. A protective gesture, they say, keeps the bad spirits away, or possibly the flies. You follow him toward the center of the village, where flat stones form a kind of plaza. At the edge is a small shrine, just a niche carved into mud brick, inside of which sits a tiny soot-dark statue of what looks like a grain deity. You're told his name is lost, but they call him the Keeper of Ferment. He's got one wide eye and two stubby arms, holding what could be jugs, or perhaps loaves, it's hard to tell. Either way, he looks permanently unimpressed, like a god who has seen too many bad batches. Around the statue, people leave offerings, dried grain, bits of clay beads, even small fragments of broken pots. One child solemnly sets down a lizard skull. You're not sure if that's symbolic or just a kid being a kid. The priest places the painted gourd beside the statue and begins to chant. The language is older than the temple ruins up the hill, some kind of proto-Nubian, with syllables that bounce like pebbles in a pan. People join in softly. You don't know the words, but you feel the rhythm. The beer isn't just drink. It's a bond. Between people. Between generations. Between the living and the dead. As the chant fades, a woman named Tamara gestures for you to help her with today's fermentation setup. She speaks slowly, with the clarity of someone used to explaining things to over-eager goats or very lost time travelers. She hands you a shallow bowl filled with ground millet and points toward the clay jar. You add the powder to the mixture. Then she hands you honey. Not a lot, just enough to offer the bacteria a little sugar boost. Not sweet, she says, strong. You stir. A swarm of gnats makes a bold assault on your face, drawn by the rising aroma, warm, yeasty, and sour like wet bread left on a windowsill too long. You swat, ineffectually. Tamara smirks. It's not just the ingredients that are sacred. The timing matters too. Some days are good for brewing. Others, they say, will bring rot or madness. Historians still debate whether this timing was based on celestial tracking gut instinct, or maybe just trial and error over centuries. Some even think lunar cycles played a part. You glance up. The moon is a sliver sharp and watching. It doesn't blink. Tamara covers the jar with cloth and secures it with a cord. Then she draws a symbol on the side, using a slurry of ash and river clay. It looks like a spiral, with a tail, kind of like a cartoon worm doing yoga. She tells you it means breathe well. You're not sure if she means the beer, the jar, or you. Meanwhile, the villagers begin to gather again this time, not for healing, but celebration. A boy has just reached adulthood, and that means his first sanctioned drink of the fermented stuff. He's wearing a necklace made of dried beans and walking like someone who hasn't figured out how knees are supposed to work. People laugh gently. A bowl of beer is handed to him. He sniffs it and winces. You feel for him. First sips are rarely elegant. He drinks. The crowd cheers. The boy coughs, once sways slightly and smiles. That's when someone claps you on the back and hands you another bowl. No escaping now. You sip again. It's different from yesterday. Earthier, almost smoky. The bark Tamara added has changed the profile. You wonder what sort of chemical reactions are happening here. Enzymes, acids, sugars. Something ancient and complex and probably still beyond your ability to explain without a microscope and Wi-Fi. Later, as the sun tilts west and the shadows stretch like lazy cats across the plaza, you sit with Tamara again. She's telling a story about a time the beer turned blue, which everyone took as a sign of blessings. You want to ask if that batch also cured someone's infection, or just gave them spectacular dreams, but you don't want to interrupt. She seems to be staring into a memory too vivid to risk breaking. You lean back, bowl in hand, and let your thoughts drift. You've had beer before, sure. But this is a different universe. Not just drink, not just medicine, not just ritual. It's all three plus mystery plus culture, plus a little bit of biological chaos that somehow miraculously works. And maybe this is what history tastes like. You wake with a start. Something's brushing your leg, a beetle maybe, or just a wayward stalk of millet, and for a moment you forget where you are. The air is still heavy, with the musty perfume of fermenting grain and sun-warmed clay. Somewhere a baby is crying. Somewhere else, a donkey laughs, like it just heard a really dumb joke. But you're still thinking about the beer. The villagers are already busy again. This time, they're preparing something special. You notice an old man carefully selecting stalks of sprouted grain, examining each one like a jeweler, eyeing flawed emeralds. A few go into the basket. Most are discarded. You walk closer and squat beside him. He doesn't look up. He just says, "Only the green ones, the ones that have fuzz." You nod as if you understand, even though, let's be honest, you really don't. The fuzz, though, there it is, bright green and growing in tight little curls around the base of each grain. It looks like mold. Bad mold. The kind your modern fridge would scream at you to toss. But here, this mold is magic. You've seen green mold before on bread in lunchboxes in college apartments that should have been condemned. But this mold is different. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just penicillium or streptomyces. Maybe this desert is brewing its own pharmacy right under your nose, one microbe at a time. Tamara appears beside you carrying a carved wooden bowl. Inside is a mash of pre-fermented millet, now thick as gruel, and just as fragrant. She mixes in the fuzzy grains with practiced precision, stirring slowly, always clockwise. You make a note of that. Always clockwise. When you try it later, you go counterclockwise, and Tamara snatches the paddle from your hand like you've insulted her ancestors. She probably isn't wrong. You watch her smear the mixture into wide, shallow jars, ones made of a different clay than the deep fermenting vessels. These are thinner, sun-baked, and slightly porous, perfect for what she calls the breathing stage. You repeat the phrase under your breath, liking how it feels on your tongue. Breathing stage, as if the beer itself is alive, which, in a way, it is. Later, you're invited to help cover the jars with palm fronds, weighed down with small rocks. You nod solemnly like a junior apprentice, and do your best not to trip over the chicken pecking at your toes. One of the children whispers, "Careful, it's watching," and points to the tiny statue of the grain god again. He's still frowning. Now you begin to wonder, were the Nubians just very lucky in their microbial choices? Or was this process more deliberate than we give them credit for? Historians still argue whether ancient brewers truly understood what they were cultivating, or if centuries of observation simply mimicked intention. After all, if every time you include the fuzzy grain, your uncle's leg infection goes away, eventually you stop asking questions and just keep doing it. You lie back in the shade of a sycamore fig tree and let your thoughts simmer. A few feet away, 2 women sit over a cloth, spread with dried herbs. Some you recognize, others you don't. One smells like mint. One smells like despair. The third smells like your grandmother's closet in July. Each has a role in the flavor, the fermentation, or the ceremony. Some are burned to ward off sour batches. Some are brewed into side drinks for balance. One is rubbed on the brewer's wrists for luck. You don't ask which one. Superstition runs strong out here, and frankly, you're already in deep. That afternoon, a small procession begins. Not a parade, more like a quiet honoring. The beer that was started days ago is now ready. People carry the jars to the central courtyard, singing softly, almost like lullabies. You follow along, keeping to the back, holding a bowl with both hands, like it might contain moonlight instead of sludgy, fizzy beer. They pour the finished product into low, wide dishes, and people dip in communal cups, each one carved with simple shapes, zigzags, sun's animals. You drink. The taste has changed again. It's sharper, funkier, like old sourdough had a philosophical crisis in a thunderstorm. But it's still good, still comforting. You overhear one elder mutter, "The gods like the moldy ones best." Another chimes in, "Because they're the only ones strong enough to survive the journey." You think he's being poetic, or maybe literal. Out here, it's hard to tell the difference. Then someone mentions that a local healer once used this beer to pack a wound, soaked a cloth in it, and wrapped it around a festering cut. And within days, the infection disappeared. Another woman says her sister used it for tooth pain. Made her drool for 3 hours, she adds, but the ache left and never came back. You don't know how much is true, how much is exaggerated. But what you do know is this. There's something going on inside these brews. Something invisible but potent. Something ancient and alive. A collaboration between man and microbe memory. And mold. Back in the modern world, scientists would later dig up bones from these very regions. Bones that had absorbed tetracycline and antibiotic. Somehow these ancient people had stumbled upon, or perhaps meticulously developed a way, to infuse their beer with medicine. Not by adding it in, but by letting the right bacteria grow in the right way, under the right sun, in the right jars. There's a kind of genius in that, and a kind of humility too. Because no one here brags about it. No one hangs a sign that says now with 20% more tetracycline. They just stir clockwise, wait for the fuzz, and trust the process. The sun dips lower. The jars are nearly empty. You're a little drunk, a little sunburned, and more than a little awed. And as the villagers start preparing tomorrow's batch this time, with a different herb, a different prayer, a different phase of the moon, you realize you're starting to understand. Not everything has to be explained to be wise. You rise before the sun this time, determined to see the brewing from the very beginning. The air is cool and crisp, not yet scorched by the usual desert sun, and dew clings stubbornly to the edges of woven thatch roofs and curled fig leaves. Somewhere a rooster clears its throat, like it regrets everything. You follow the scent. The brewing pit is already alive. Not with people yet, but with life of another kind. The jars from yesterday are uncovered, their frothy contents shifting lazily as trapped gases burble to the surface. A layer of scum has formed on top, thick and dark, like the crust on a forgotten stew. It smells sour, sharp, complex. It also smells, if you're honest, a bit like gym socks left in a puddle. Tamara is there already. Of course she is. She's got her arms elbow-deep in a jar churning the mixture with a long-handled spoon that looks like it's older than some countries. She looks up at you and says without irony, "Today is a good day for stink." You nod like this is normal because here it is. The Nubians didn't try to mask the fermentation odors. They welcomed them. These strong smells were signs of vitality proof that the brew was alive, fermenting healing. And yes, maybe a little offensive to the nostrils, but entirely necessary. You breathe in through your mouth. It doesn't help. You're shown how the frothy head on each jar behaves differently. Some form thick caps that crack and hiss. Others develop a thin green film, yes, actual mold, carefully skimmed, inspected, and sometimes stirred back in. You're told the mold carries the strength. It's not just tolerated, it's sought after, desired, like a frothy blessing, or an organic punch in the face. Nearby, someone lays out bundles of millet to dry grain that will become tomorrow's base. A few stalks are already dotted with specks of green and white. In your world, this would be tossed. But here it's prime brewing material. You begin to realize how differently these people interact with decay. In the West, mold is a menace. Here it's a friend with benefits, Suddenly a sharp snap makes you jump. You turn. It's a crocodile. Okay, not right next to you, but close enough to make your blood do push-ups. It sprawled at the edge of the nearby water channel, its scales catching the light, like cracked bronze. No one else reacts. Apparently, this croc is a regular beer guardian. Someone says deadpan. You don't ask whether they're joking. The water channel, it turns out, plays a critical role in the brewing process. The jars are arranged near it for a reason. The shifting temperature and the cool night air off the water help regulate fermentation. The humidity helps too. And yes, sometimes the crocodiles. It's all part of the ecology. You crouch beside one of the half-filled jars and peer in. There's a thick crust of millet solids floating on top, dappled with something greenish. You recognize the smell. Now it's similar to soil after heavy rain, mixed with sour porridge and something faintly medicinal. You're told not to disturb it. The crust acts like a cap, helping to contain heat and support microbial growth. Want to taste, someone asks. You hesitate. Always a dangerous question when mold is involved. Still, you've come this far. They hand you a small ceramic ladle. You dip it in carefully, drawing liquid from beneath the cap. It's warm, almost body temperature, and thicker than before. You sip. Your tongue goes on a journey. First sour and tart, then earthy, then something bitter that lingers just a little too long. You cough. Tamara laughs. Good medicine always tastes bad, she says, wiping her hands. Historians still argue whether the Nubians intentionally cultivated the antibiotic-producing bacteria or simply got lucky through years of trial and error. Some believe they recognized the signs of successful brews: fewer fevers, faster healing, less pus, though thankfully no one here uses that word. Others argue it was all spiritual visions, dreams, celestial signs guiding their recipes. You suspect it was both. Science and spirit aren't separate here. They dance together like beer foam in the sun. Later, a group gathers under the shade of acacia trees, drinking the latest batch from shared bowls. The conversations are slow, sleepy, thick with laughter. A woman with a raspy cough is handed an especially dark portion. She winces after the first gulp, then nods. One of the elders leans toward you. His face is like leather, left out during a windstorm, and he speaks through 3 remaining teeth. "This one's strong," he says, tapping the rim of the bowl. "The kind that keeps death 2 steps back. It's not a toast. It's a fact." In modern labs, microbiologists would eventually isolate the tetracycline compounds from Nubian skeletal remains, confirming that regular ingestion of these brews had long-term effects. Antibiotic beer. It sounds like a hipster gimmick, but it was real, and not brewed in steel tanks or sterile labs, but here, among barefoot brewers' smelly jars, and yes, crocodiles. You wonder how many lives were saved, how many infections never took hold, how many children grew strong because of the careful dance between grain and mold. You look down at your empty bowl. A fly lands on the rim. You flick it away gently. Not everything beautiful has to smell nice. The heat arrives mid-morning, sliding in like an unwanted guest, and pressing against your skin with all the subtlety of a wet wool blanket. You retreat to the shade of a thatched awning beside the brewing circle, fanning yourself lazily with a palm frond that's doing almost nothing. But what really catches your attention is the quiet urgency in the way people are moving. A child has fallen ill. You hear it in the hushed voices, see it in the way the older women stop their work gathering herbs and whispering over them. You're beckoned over not to help, but to watch. This is a ritual, one that's part medicine, part prayer, and entirely built around the same cloudy beer you've been sipping all week. The child is maybe 5, maybe 6. His eyes are glazed and a faint flush colors his cheeks. His mother kneels beside him, murmuring softly. Beside her, an older woman prepares a bowl, thick clay, rough edges, the kind that's been used for 100 other small emergencies. Into it, she pours a portion of the fermented beer, dark sludgy, nearly bubbling with sour energy. She dips a strip of cloth into it and presses it to the child's forehead. Then the bowl is lifted to his lips. Not much, just a few spoonfuls. The boy winces, swallows, sputters a bit, then rests again. You don't ask if it's working. You just sit and wait. Over the next hour, others bring offerings to the family. A carved wooden bead, a tuft of dried lemongrass, a gourd filled with cooling water. No one says much. They just sit nearby, letting their presence speak. Tamara tells you this particular batch was brewed with a special grain, one harvested near the river's edge, where the soil is rich with clay and the air thick with mist. The river gives it strength, she says, and sometimes, if we're lucky, it gives us life. The beer is known in the village for its potency not just in healing, but in warding off evil, or at least bad luck. Whether that's the bacteria talking, or the faith of 1,000 generations is anyone's guess. Later, as the boy dozes, you ask Tamara if they've ever used this brew for wounds. She nods. Many times. Not just to drink. We soak the cloth, wrap the leg. Once a man was bitten by a camel. Big bite. Ugly. He could not walk. But the beer hot strong took the fever away. You try to imagine camel bite beer therapy. It sounds like the worst spa day in history. Still, it worked. In fact, modern studies have shown that not only were these ancient Nubian beers high in tetracycline, but the concentration was often consistent, meaning the brewers weren't just throwing things into a pot and hoping for the best. They had a method, an instinctive science, maybe even a recipe, though, likely one guarded closely and passed down only through memory and trust. Historians still debate whether the Nubians intentionally selected moldy grain to achieve these effects, or if it was simply the result of environmental conditions favoring the growth of antibiotic-producing bacteria. But let's be real. When you've brewed the same drink for centuries, and you know which batches heal and which don't, you figure out what works, even if you don't write it down. That evening, as the sun bruises the sky with orange and violet, the village holds a small gathering around the boy's home. He's sitting up now, still weak, but smiling. His father offers you a bowl of the same brew they used, perhaps as a thank you, or maybe as insurance. You take it. Sip. It tastes stronger than usual, with a bitter edge that lingers like a warning. The priest arrives again, not for a sermon, but for a blessing. He waves a bundle of herbs over the family, dips his fingers in a dish of beer, and flicks droplets toward the 4 corners of the room. Protection, they say, for the child, for the home, for the next batch of beer. You step outside and sit beneath the stars. They're brighter than they have any right to be. The air is finally cooling. Somewhere a jar cracks softly as gas bubbles push against hardened clay. You realize something simple and profound. This beer isn't just food or drink or even medicine. It's infrastructure. It's cultural scaffolding. It's what ties this place together like mortar between ancient stones. The beer heals bodies, but it also binds families, offers, protects, remembers. It's hard not to be moved by that. A goat wanders over and sniffs your bowl. You gently push it away, but not before it bleats at you with undeniable judgment, as if to say, "You're starting to get it finally." Yeah, goat. Maybe you are. Morning in the Nubian village arrives with less fanfare today. No coughing fits, no crocodiles on patrol. Just a quiet, slow unfurling of the day, like a blanket being pulled gently off a sleeping child. You stretch limbs sore but content, and shuffle your way toward the brewing area, where steam is already rising from a fresh mash of crushed millet and water. The fire is low, the smoke curling sideways like it's still yawning too. Today's batch is different, special even. Tamara explains that the grain used this morning was harvested during a red moon. She says this with the kind of certainty that doesn't invite skepticism. Apparently, when the moon goes coppery and strange, the millet remembers more. You raise an eyebrow, but you've learned not to argue with desert wisdom. Besides, who's to say grains don't have memories? Yours do, especially when you forget them in a Tupperware for 2 weeks. As the mash begins to thicken, one of the older men dips his hand into a woven pouch and pulls out a clump of something that looks like blue-green moss. No one else reacts, but your curiosity ignites. He crumbles the stuff into the pot like it's oregano and stirs. You lean in. What was that? Tamara smiles faintly. "River dust," she says, "from the edge of the sacred bend. You've heard of this place now whispered in passing, where the water changes color, and fish refuse to swim too close. Apparently the soil there is rich with unseen spirits, or bacteria, possibly both. And that strange blue-green dust. It's likely packed with streptomyces, the humble genus of bacteria responsible for producing natural antibiotics, like tetracycline. It doesn't look like much, but it could change everything. Centuries from now, microbiologists would analyze ancient Nubian bones and discover the glowing fluorescence of tetracycline embedded deep within the skeletons. These people weren't just drinking mild antiseptics. They were consistently ingesting therapeutically active substances. In beer, homemade, barefoot, possibly while swatting flies. You watch as the mixture bubbles. The foam at the top turns from beige to ochre, then tinges faintly green. No one seems concerned. In fact, Tamara leans over and whispers, "It's listening." You don't ask what it is. Instead, you learn the next step, fermentation layering. As the pot cools slightly, they add another batch of dried and sprouted grain. The goal, they explain, is to keep the microbes engaged, not too hot, not too cold, always fed, always humming, like running a tiny ecosystem in a pot. You're starting to see it now, not just as a drink, but as a living thing, a colony, a quiet, frothing biome of bacteria and enzymes that must be coaxed, not commanded. You glance down and swear the liquid moves with intent like it's breathing. You decide to keep that to yourself. Over lunch, you sit with a woman named Amma. She's old, so old that her face is more wrinkle than skin, but her hands are firm, and her laughter is frequent. She tells you stories of children cured by the green jars of infections that melted away, and of a time she poured beer into the ear of a sick goat and watched it recover the next day. You ask if she thinks the beer is magic. She shrugs. Magic, no. But the gods like the taste, and sometimes they listen. Later that afternoon, you help her prepare a smaller batch of beer for personal use, not for healing, not for ceremony, just for drinking. It's less complicated, fewer herbs, no river dust, no chanting. Still, she moves with care. The grain is toasted first, which changes the flavor. You take a sip, and are surprised it's actually kind of good. Tangy nutty, like unsweetened porridge with opinions. That night you lie on your back beside the embers of the dying fire, the stars hanging low like lanterns. Somewhere behind you, the jars continue to bubble quietly. Their contents darken with time, grow stronger, more complex. You begin to wonder how much of this process was stumbled upon by accident, and how much was cultivated through intuition. Did one woman centuries ago discover that riverbank soil made better beer? Did someone notice that jars placed near the fig tree fermented faster, that the green foam batch cured fevers, while the yellow foam batch just gave people gas? Historians still argue whether these brewers truly understood the microbial miracle in their hands, whether they bred these bacteria on purpose or simply trusted their ancestors' repetition. But here now, sitting among them, you realize the debate doesn't matter as much as the outcome. These people knew what worked, and they never stopped doing it. Not out of blind tradition, but because the evidence was sleeping in the next room, fever-gone color back in his cheeks. Because their elders lived long enough to tell stories. Because the beer somehow kept working. A donkey brays in the distance. A jar pops and hisses. A beetle scuttles over your foot, like it owns the place. And the beer continues to breathe. You're starting to get used to the smell. It's no less pungent, still a robust bouquet of damp grain swamp breath and very confident bacteria. But your nose no longer recoils on impact. It just accepts the aroma, like it's part of the air. Like sun and sweat and sand, this scent is now part of the rhythm of your days. You follow Tamara to the edge of the village, where the earth rises into small burial mounds, marked by stacked stones and faded carvings. The beer pots have led you here not for brewing, but for what comes after. She tells you that today they're opening a tomb. Not a dramatic tomb robber kind of opening. This one was partially uncovered by a recent flood, and now the villagers want to rebury it properly after paying respects. They believe in honoring the dead, not just with words, but with the same beer that sustained them in life, as if that frothy, fermented gift still has one more job to do. The grave is shallow, but the bones are there laid in fetal position, arms curled as if embracing sleep. Someone has already cleared the sand, exposing ribs, and a skull, tinted the color of red earth. But it's the bones that catch your eye. They don't just lie quietly. They glow, not visibly, not like in cartoons, but you learn that when examined under UV light, many ancient Nubian skeletons show telltale signs of tetracycline fluorescence. Modern scientists discovered this in the 1980s, shocked to find consistent traces of antibiotic residue embedded in the very bones of these people. Some bones glowed so brightly under the black light that it looked like they'd been marinated in penicillin. You lean closer. Tamira points to the femur. This one lived long, she says. She had a sick tooth once. We gave her the green jar. The swelling went away. You want to ask if this is the same woman whose goat survived the beer treatment, but that feels rude. So you just nod. They prepare an offering, no gold or treasure, just a bowl of beer thick and brown, still warm from the last fermentation. It's poured onto the earth, slowly seeping into the sand, like the dead are still thirsty. You help scatter millet husks over the grave, along with a few dried herbs, and the top shard of a broken pot. Everything, even in death, connects back to the brew. It's humbling. This isn't a culture that brews for pleasure alone. Their beer is woven into every phase of life, from birth to illness, to marriage, to yes, even burial. It's medicine, celebration, and sacrament. It's the communal thread binding the living to the dead, and the past to the future. You sit quietly as the sun climbs higher. There's no speech, no weeping, just a silence that feels full rather than empty. You sip your own bowl, its surface dusted with a thin film that shimmers oddly in the light. You wonder what it's doing inside you, what invisible war it might be fighting right now silently, without fanfare. Later that day, you return to the village. A group of children are pretending to brew, pouring sand and water into cracked jars, adding crushed leaves, and laughing at each other's terrible stirring technique. You watch one girl carefully draw a spiral on her pretend pot, just like Tamara does. The pattern is familiar now, life-breath continuation. Historians still puzzle over how the Nubians achieved such regular antibiotic dosing. Was it chance or a refined process? Were they intentionally cultivating certain bacterial colonies, or just letting nature do its thing? Some argue that their soil was naturally teeming with the right organisms. Others insist the brewers must have noticed that green foam jars healed better than no foam ones. But none of the villagers you've met are wondering. They already know what works. They don't need a microscope to trust their memories. That night, the village gathers for a small feast. Roasted roots lentils spiced with coriander, and of course, bowls of beer passed from hand to hand. As you drink, you listen to the laughter around you, the soft lull of voices swapping stories and small gossips. The beer tonight is mild, less bitter, more mellow. Gentle batch, someone says. Good for the belly. You nod, pretending you can tell the difference. But the warmth in your chest isn't just the alcohol. It's something deeper, heavier, like you've joined something ancient, a lineage of people who heal each other not just with potions, but with time-tested care. Before you sleep, you walk back to the burial site. It's quiet now. Just wine stars and a faint whiff of fermentation drifting over the dunes. You place your hand gently on the packed earth, and you swear, just for a second, that it hums. You wake to the sound of grinding grain against stone, labor against silence. Outside the small hut where you've been staying, 2 young women kneel by a flat slab of sandstone, rhythmically crushing millet into fine powder. The sun hasn't fully risen yet, but the air already smells of earth and wood smoke and beer. You stretch, yawn, and amble over just as Tamar emerges from the shadows, carrying a ceramic jar, with the pride of someone handling gold. It's hot to the touch, fresh from a fire pit, and sealed with a palm leaf stopper. She cracks it open, and a hiss escapes like the sigh of something waking up. Inside, the beer glows dull yellow. No foam this time, just a steady, pulsing bubble rising from the bottom. It's been fermenting for days. You ask what's different about this batch. Tamara leans in and whispers, "No hops." You blink. Of course there are no hops. Hops wouldn't be introduced to beer for another few thousand years, halfway across the world. These Nubians brewed with millet, sometimes sorghum, and flavoring agents like herbs, tree bark, or crushed fruit. Bitterness came from nature's pantry, not fancy brewmaster menus. You dip a gourd ladle in and take a cautious sip. It's gritty, like drinking liquid oatmeal with opinions. The texture is thick, almost chewy. Bits of grain float freely, swirling like sediment at the bottom of an old bottle of wine. The flavor sour, sharp, and earthy, not exactly refreshing. But somehow it grows on you. There's a kick to it, a fizz that makes your lips tingle. Not carbonation like modern beer, but a soft, effervescent pulse. The Nubians didn't have carbonation tanks, of course. What they did have Was active fermentation natural CO2 bubbling up from living bacteria? You watch the brew closely, and sure enough, tiny gas pockets rise through the murky liquid and pop at the surface like ancient applause. One of the younger brewers explains that this particular strain of grain came from a plot near termite mounds. Apparently, the termites enrich the soil in a way that makes the millet more excited. You're not sure what that means chemically, but you write it down anyway, in your notebook, which no longer smells like ink. By the way, it smells like fermented grain and destiny. As you help ladle beer into new jars for an upcoming celebration, you hear more talk about the role of the beer in everyday health, not just as a treatment for illness, but as a kind of preventive measure. Some drink it every morning, others just when they feel the wind, a poetic way of saying they sense sickness coming. You meet a toothless man who claims he's never had a fever thanks to the river jars. He shows you a scar on his leg where he once got infected after a thorn wound. Rubbed it with beer, he says, and a little goat dung. You nod, not sure whether to be impressed or concerned. That afternoon, a group of children perform a song about beer. Yes, a song. It's simple, repetitive, and full of hand clapping and stomping. The lyrics, loosely translated, go something like, "The grain grows, the pot warms, the foam rises, the fever falls. Drink deep, sleep safe, wake laughing." You're not crying exactly, but your chest tightens a bit. These kids are singing what might be the world's oldest public health jingle. Later, you help stack the finished jars in the cool shade of a clay storage hut. They're labeled with small stone markers. No words, just scratched symbols. A sun, a wave, a curled vine. Tamara tells you each brewer has their own mark, and each jar its own meaning. This one, she says, tapping a jar with a zigzag, is for when the nose runs. It's a literal apothecary of ale. No bottles, no pills, just microbes, memory, and mud. Historians still don't fully understand how the Nubians managed to achieve such consistency in their brewing. Some theorize that the porous clay used for the jars acted as a natural culture holder, like a sourdough starter, but for beer. Others think the same pots were reused so often that the bacteria colonized them permanently, clinging to the tiny scratches and grooves like microscopic tenants. Whatever the method, it worked. Modern lab analyses of Nubian pottery shards have revealed residue rich with antibiotic markers. In other words, the healing agents weren't an accident. They were a pattern, a system, maybe not formalized, but certainly remembered. You sip from your own bowl as the sun dips low. This batch is cooler now, and the grain solids have settled. The top layer is smoother, almost silken. You drink slowly, letting the warmth spread through your chest, like a blanket stitched from microbes. The taste lingers, earthy, nutty, a little strange, but real. By now the beer no longer surprises you. It still shifts in flavor, some batches tart and aggressive, others mellow like wet bread left too long in the sun. But you've developed the kind of tolerance usually reserved for grandparents watching TikTok videos. You don't flinch anymore when a bowl of the stuff is passed your way. You just sip and nod like someone in on an ancient joke. But today, something feels off. You're sitting beneath the shade of a spindly tree, watching the village go about its routines, when you notice a quiet tension creeping through the air. Nothing dramatic, no screaming, no chaos, but the kind of hush that settles in when people are worried, but trying to look normal. You soon find out why. An elder woman, thin and stern-eyed, has developed a fever. She's strong, one of the oldest in the village, and still sharp enough to make you feel like a toddler. But this illness came on fast. Too fast. Her daughter tells you it started in the night, with chills and nausea. By morning, her legs were trembling and she couldn't eat. The beer, of course, is brought. But this time it doesn't help. She drinks from the green batch, the one drawn from the jars, with the richest foam, the strongest fermentation. She sips slowly, murmuring prayers between each swallow. The rest of the village waits. By noon, she's no better. Tamara and a few others gather in a tight circle, whispering. You edge closer, curious. She sees your face and offers a single word, bad batch. Your stomach drops, not from fear, but recognition. In a system built entirely on balance, one rotten element can tip everything. Maybe the grain was too old. Maybe the mold grew wrong. Maybe the river dust had lost its spark. Or maybe it was just fate. The bad batch becomes the talk of the village. Not loudly, not with panic, but with the cautious reverence people reserve for broken things that used to work. Everyone agrees. The foam was too flat, the crust too thin. One woman claims she saw a beetle crawl into the jar during fermentation. Another blames her husband who forgot to stir clockwise, always clockwise. Historians still argue whether ancient brewers understood how to prevent microbial contamination. Some evidence suggests they reused vessels deliberately to preserve healthy bacterial colonies. Others think they identified bad jars by sight and smell early forms of quality control, even without microscopes. You walk with Tamara to inspect the brewing pit. She picks up one of the suspect jars and sniffs. Her nose wrinkles. It's wrong, she says. It smells like it's lying. That's a phrase you won't forget. The bad batch is dumped unceremoniously, but respectfully, into a compost pit. Not a punishment, just protocol. No one drinks from it. No one jokes. It's returned to the earth where it can rot without risk. By dusk, the elder is still weak but stable. The fever has plateaued. A different batch of beer, one fermented beneath a neem tree and infused with bitter bark, is offered next. She drinks without protest. That night, the village is subdued. No songs, no ceremonies, just the low murmur of people processing disappointment. You sit alone with your bowl, sipping a mild brew. It tastes cautious, like it's apologizing for the previous jar's sins. And for the first time since arriving, you wonder how many times did they get it wrong? How many lives were lost before the right combination of grain and mold and time aligned? How many prayers were whispered into bubbling jars that never answered back? This isn't just history. It's risk management. The village knows this too. They've lived it. That's why they observe so carefully, why they sniff every lid, taste every foam, listen to every gurgle like it's a confession. You glance at Tamara, who's squatting by a fresh pot, rubbing the rim with a paste made from ash and mint leaves. She whispers something to it, too soft to hear. But her posture says it all. This isn't superstition. It's survival. And maybe it's healing too. The next morning, the village smells like ash and resolve. Tamara is already at the brewing pit, sleeves rolled face set with quiet determination. You can tell by the way she moves, sharper, more deliberate, that today is about making things right. Yesterday's bad batch still lingers in the air like smoke after a kitchen fire, and no one is taking chances. Watch carefully, she says, handing you a clay paddle. You do. This is the most meticulous process you've witnessed yet. Every step is measured, every movement precise. The grain has been soaked overnight, sprouted, and then dried again in flat woven baskets. You're told this awakens the starches while also discouraging lazy mold. Lazy mold, apparently, is the worst. First comes the grind, 2 flat stones rubbed together until the millet breaks into soft dust. You take a turn feeling the vibration in your forearms. The result is a coarse, slightly sweet powder, which Tamara sieves through a mesh made from split reeds. We don't want the bitter husk, she says, only the promise inside. The flour is mixed with water in large clay jars that have been scrubbed with sand and rinsed in neem-infused water. Neem, you learn, isn't just a nice-smelling leaf. It's antibacterial, an ancient sanitizer. As you watch Tamara scrub, you realize this village has been running a biosecure fermentation lab in open air for centuries. Next, the starter. She opens a small jar covered in cloth. Inside is a thick paste, the color of peanut butter, and the smell of week-old bread. It's a slurry of old beer-dried herbs, and river dust, the microbial soul of every batch. She scoops it out with reverence like a priest handling relics, and stirs it into the fresh mash. This is the mother, she explains. It lives quite literally from one brew to the next. A continuous lineage of bacteria passed from pot to pot, like a sourdough starter that never dies unless you forget to feed it, in which case it curses your children with blandness, or so claims an old woman nearby. You laugh, but only a little. The brewing vessels are covered with palm mats and set in the sun for exactly 3 hours. Not 2, not 4. Tamara insists this timing is vital. Any more, and the heat turns the brew sour before it's ready. Any less, and it stays asleep. You make a mental note. Fermentation is a cranky houseguest. Later, you help stir. Always clockwise, always slowly. The liquid thickens as enzymes break down starch into sugar. Bubbles begin to rise, not chaotic, just gentle bloops that sound like the jar is clearing its throat. By now, you've realized this isn't a recipe. It's choreography. Each step flows into the next, adjusted for heat, humidity, even mood. One brewer hums while stirring. Another taps the side of the jar after each swirl. You ask why. He shrugs. My grandmother did it. Keeps the foam honest. You smile and tap the jar just in case. Historians still argue whether the Nubians followed consistent protocols for fermentation or simply brewed by instinct. But after watching this process, you're inclined to believe it was both. Instinct, shaped by generations of trial and error. A living science carried not in scrolls, but in memory-calloused hands and shared bowls. Once the jars are sealed and moved to the fermentation hut, Tamara wipes her hands on her robe and exhales like someone finishing a sacred rite. You ask if it worked. We'll know in 3 days, she says. If the foam rises strong, the mother is pleased. 3 days, 3 sleeps, 3 sunrises to see whether today's careful efforts will yield the fizz of health or the flatness of failure. In the meantime, you're sent to help with side preparations, carving gourds, boiling neem leaves, and mixing cooling teas from dried hibiscus and cinnamon bark. These drinks are served with the beer during hot afternoons to keep the body from boiling over. You try one. It's tangy, sour, sweet, and makes your tongue feel like it went on a very polite roller coaster. That evening, Tamara teaches you how to check the beer for progress. Smell, she says first. You remove the cover from a test jar and inhale. It smells right. Still sour, but alive. Bright even. Like the difference between dead leaves and freshly mown grass. Then listen. She leans close. You mimic her. Inside the jar, you hear faint crackling. The fizz is real. The bacteria are hard at work. You imagine tiny organisms gossiping in there, trading sugar for survival-building antibiotics, like microscopic wizards. Finally, she says taste. You hesitate. Already she nods. A small sip. The middle layer. Not the foam. You scoop a ladleful. Sip. It's young, still green, as they say, but promising. There's a brightness to it. A snap. No bitterness. No slime. You glance at Tamara. She smiles. This batch is honest, she says. You don't know if that's a technical term or just a feeling, but it works. And as the sky bruises into evening, and the jars settle into their second day of transformation, you realize something. This isn't just beer brewing. It's memory fermentation. It's knowledge carried in bubbles, wisdom held in jars, healing brewed in silence, and stirred by the hands of people who don't need to explain why they do what they do, because it works. And it always has. You return to the brewing circle 3 days later and immediately know it worked. The foam has risen high, curling like thick cappuccino cream at the rim of each jar. It has that perfect wobble, that subtle hiss like tiny creatures exhaling their final breath before turning into medicine. Tamara stands beside it, with arms folded, not smiling, but satisfied. This is what victory looks like here. No celebration, just a nod from a stern woman in dusty robes. The batch is ready. Today is also a market day, and word has spread that the honest batch has finished. So in a twist, you didn't expect a few Egyptian traders arrive just past midday faces wrapped in linen sandals, thick with Nile mud, and camels that look like they'd rather be anywhere else. They're not here for spice, not here for salt. They've come for beer. Tamara greets them with cautious familiarity. These are regulars, she tells you. They come from upriver every few months to collect a few jars for their temple men and city doctors. You arch a brow. Priests and doctors drinking medicinal beer brewed in unmarked pots by barefoot Nubians. That's not in your textbooks. The jars are ladled out into goatskin bladders, tied off with cord, and stacked in woven crates lined with straw. The traders nod their approval, press small bundles of goods into Tamara's hands, dried dates, yellow ochre, a length of dyed linen, and prepare for the return journey. You ask one of them what the beer is used for back home. To clean the blood, he says, to cool the tongue, and sometimes for those who hear whispers at night. Then he smirks and adds, also the priests just like it. Fair enough. You watch them disappear into the horizon, camel tails swishing behind them like punctuation marks, and it hits you. This beer isn't just local medicine. It's exported healing. A global commodity traded long before antibiotics had names shipped to temples where gods were worshipped, and ailments treated with the same fizzy sludge you helped stir days ago. Historians, of course, debate whether this Nubian beer influenced Egyptian practices. There are records of Egyptians brewing their own forms of fermented grain drink, but none seem to match the peculiar strength of these southern jars. Some researchers think they may have even imported Nubian brewers or recipes to replicate the effect. Others believe the Egyptians just liked the taste. Either way, the jars moved. The microbes traveled. The medicine went global quietly, invisibly, from hand to jar, to camel cart. Back in the village, the remaining beer is rationed into bowls and shared. Not all of it is meant for healing. Some is for strength. One batch is earmarked for a woman about to give birth. Another, for a man recovering from a tooth extraction, done with a smooth rock and zero small talk. You watch him grimace as he drinks, then smile. A bloody grin, but a grin nonetheless. Tamara lets you help deliver a bowl to the woman in labor. She's surrounded by elder women, all of them humming softly hands, busy with cloth water and warmth. The beer is spooned into her mouth between contractions. No rush, no fuss, just steady care and fizzy faith. You step outside while they work sitting on a warm stone beneath a crooked fig tree. A young boy appears beside you holding a bowl. You accept its sip and immediately cough. It's strong, really strong. Tamara joins you a moment later, chuckling. That's the one with bark, she says. Good for chest rot, bad for the tongue. It tastes like if licorice and vinegar had a baby that hated you. Still, you take another sip. You've come this far. As the sun dips low, casting the village in soft shadows, you sit with Tamara and a few others who've gathered to talk about old recipes. Each brewer here remembers their mother's blend, their father's tweaks, their own mistakes. There's no central book, no scroll of sacred instructions, just memory muscle and community. One man, his beard white and wild, insists that the best batches come during the season, when fire ants swarm. Their anger makes the air strong, he says. Everyone laughs, but no one fully dismisses him. You're beginning to see the deeper magic of it all. This isn't beer in the way you know it. It's not just a drink. It's a tool, a ritual, a conversation between nature and human hands, between bacteria and belief, between centuries past and bowls still warm today. Before bed, Tamara shows you the storage pit, cool, dark, and lined with old clay. Inside rest the reserve jars, a few pints of every successful batch from the past year, carefully sealed and hidden from the sun. Insurance, memory, legacy, the village's immune system in ceramic form. You reach out and touch one jar gently. It's warm, or maybe it's just you. You wake up to laughter. Not the casual kind, but the belly-deep cackling that only comes when something has gone delightfully absurdly wrong. You scramble outside, rubbing sleep from your eyes, to find a cluster of villagers crowded around a beer jar that is well foaming. A lot. More precisely, it's erupting. The foam rises in thick, frothy waves like some desert volcano, bubbling over the rim, splattering onto the dirt like yeast-powered lava. One child tries to catch it in a bowl, misses entirely, and ends up with beer all over his tunic. He doesn't mind. Neither does anyone else. Tamara wades and hands on hips expression, somewhere between amused and exhausted. She's too eager, she mutters, tapping the side of the jar like it's misbehaving. Apparently, this batch fermented a little too well. No one's entirely sure why. Some blame the heat, others, the phase of the moon. And one woman insists it's because the brewer forgot to place a dried sprig of lemongrass near the jar. She broke the rhythm, the woman says ominously. You ask Tamara what really caused it. She shrugs. Sometimes the beer just wants out. You're starting to appreciate this mixture of science and surrender, of ritual and realism. Historians still argue whether the Nubians had a full grasp of microbial fermentation, but watching them handle a foam geyser without panic suggests something more powerful than knowledge, familiarity. You don't need a microscope to know when something's gone sideways. You just need a lifetime of watching jars breathe. Tamara salvages what she can, collecting the overflow in smaller vessels and setting them aside to rest. It's still good, she says. Just loud. Later that day, you meet a man named Menri. He's one of the few who claims to hear the beer. You assume he's being poetic, until he walks you to a cluster of jars, nestled beneath a clay overhang, and tells you to listen. You crouch down, ear pressed to the side of the largest pot. Sure enough, there's a sound. A soft, rhythmic fizz, like distant rain falling on dry leaves. He closes his eyes and hums in tune with it. "This one is ready," he says. You can hear it resting. You ask how long he's been brewing. "Since I was shorter than a gourd," he says, pointing to a boy nearby, who's all elbows in dirt. "My father taught me. His father taught him. But I was the first to speak to the jars." He's not joking. Menry believes each jar has a personality. Some are gentle, others stubborn. One, he claims, refuses to ferment properly unless it's shaded with a specific fig leaf. You're skeptical, of course, but given what you saw earlier with the lemongrass situation, you're not dismissing anything anymore. That evening, you sit by a fire as Menry and Tamara exchange stories about batches that went wrong and batches that miraculously went right. There was the time a woman accidentally left beer in a buried pot for over a month. They opened it expecting disaster, but found it had developed an unusual thickness and color. They were about to toss it until a child with a stubborn infection drank some. She was better by morning. Sometimes Menry says the mold listens better when we're not watching. You sip from a newer jar. It's less intense than others. No medicinal bite, no weird aftertaste. Just smooth, slightly sour, and surprisingly refreshing. Day drink, someone calls it. Good for hydration and mood, not so much for miracles. It reminds you that not every brew has to save a life. Some are just meant to hold people together, to nourish, to comfort. You remember reading once that early beers like this were safer to drink than water. Boiling the mash killed off pathogens, and the fermentation lowered pH levels enough to prevent bacterial growth. In places where rivers could carry more disease than fish beer was survival, no wonder it's sacred here. As the night deepens, you ask Tamara whether she ever tried to change the recipe. Once, she says slowly, "I added too much honey. It foamed too fast. Tasted like sadness." You laugh. "People stopped asking for my jars that week." She continues, not laughing. "I had to earn them back. Brewing here isn't just craft, it's reputation, trust, a social contract sealed in sour fizz and shared bowls. You mess it up, and it's not just your ego that takes the hit, it's your place in the story." Historians often frame ancient brewing as a technical feat. They ask, how did they do it? What tools did they use? But they forget to ask something just as important. Who did they trust to do it well? Who held the knowledge, not just of ingredients, but of timing, temperament, and tradition? You look around at the people gathered here, laughing, teasing, humming to jars, and realize you're not just watching a community drink beer. You're watching a community take care of each other, one bowl at a time. By now, the beer has become a constant hum in your day. You can't walk through the village without catching a whiff of fermentation, curling through the air like a lazy spell. It follows you, lingers in your hair, clings to your clothes, and you don't even mind. It smells like life here, like work and healing and habit. But not every story has a happy ending. One morning, you wake to hushed voices outside your hut. Not excited, not panicked, just tight and brittle like reeds in a dry wind. You pull on your robe and slip outside to find a small group gathered around a sick goat, lying on its side with labored breath. Its eyes flutter. Its legs twitch weakly in the dust. The owner, a wiry man named Fari, is crouched beside it, cradling its head. He doesn't cry. He just looks tired. Tamara arrives moments later holding a small bowl of beer, thick brown, and laced with crushed herbs. She kneels and gently pours a trickle into the goat's mouth. The foam dribbles down its chin. Same mixture we used for my cousin's fever, she says. Sometimes it works for animals too. Everyone watches. No one speaks. The goat breathes slow and shallow. Minutes pass. A fly lands on its ear. The beer seeps into the sand beneath it. And then nothing. The animal goes still. Fari sighs, not surprised, just resigned. Tamara sets the bowl down carefully, not spilling a drop. The beer was right, she says. But sometimes the sickness is ruder. Later you help bury the goat near the outer edge of the village, a place where failed crops and broken tools are also laid to rest. There's no ritual, just a quiet patting down of earth and a flat stone pressed into the mound. You ask Tamara if the beer ever makes things worse. She doesn't answer right away. There are times, she says slowly, when the body cannot listen, even when the beer is shouting. You nod. You felt that quiet helplessness, the uncomfortable truth that even the best intentions steeped in tradition, shaped by generations, don't always work. The beer is powerful, but it isn't perfect. That night over the fire, you hear another story. An elder named Omeni tells of a batch brewed during a dust storm many years ago. The grains were contaminated with wind-blown ash. The foam turned gray, but no one noticed, or no one dared speak up. The beer was served at a feast. A few hours later, half the village fell sick, some with rashes, some with cramps. One child hallucinated so vividly that he tried to climb a fig tree naked in the middle of the night. They called it the sleep batch. It took days to recover. From then on, the brewer of that jar, an ambitious young man, was no longer allowed to ferment alone. He had to apprentice under 2 elders, relearn the art from the beginning. He never made the same mistake again. Historians still wrestle with these stories. Were they cautionary tales, folklore, or accounts of real microbial contamination? Spoiled batches could easily have developed harmful byproducts, toxic mold, alcohol poisoning, bacterial bloom. Without modern tools, how did these ancient brewers avoid disaster? Mostly, they didn't. They learned the hard way, through error, through community memory. You realize this beer isn't just a drink. It's a gamble, a test of knowledge, patience and consistency in a world where failure could mean more than embarrassment. It could mean illness or loss. The next morning you join Menry as he checks a fresh set of jars. He walks slowly, tapping each vessel like a doctor, checking for a heartbeat. He stops at 1 sniffs, then again. His brow furrows. This one's angry, he says. You lean in. The smell is different, sharper, more acidic. The foam is thin and discolored. Something's off. He calls for Tamara, who confirms it. The temperature was too high during the mash stage. The fermentation rushed, bloomed too fast, and killed off the delicate balance of bacteria. The beer is no longer medicine. It's just sour porridge with an attitude. Without hesitation, they bury it. Not dump it, bury it. In a small patch of sandy earth behind the storage hut, covered with clay shards and sprinkled with bitter herbs. A quiet funeral for failed fermentation. You help. It feels strangely intimate. As you pack the soil down with the side of your hand, you realize this is the other half of brewing, knowing when to let go, when not to serve, when to stop trusting the jar and trust your nose instead. Not every jar can be saved. Not every batch can heal. But every single one teaches. There's something different about the air today. It's still hot, of course, but there's a heaviness to it, like the skies holding its breath. A quiet tension rests over the village, and the usual clatter of jars and laughter seems just a little muffled. You spot Tamara standing by the old neem tree, her back stiff, arms crossed. She's waiting for someone. You follow her gaze and spot the figure approaching from the far edge of the village, an old woman hunched, wrapped in layers of cloth. Despite the heat, a long walking stick in one hand and a dried gourd in the other. Her pace is slow, but her presence is magnetic. You don't know her name, but everyone else clearly does. The last of the brewers, someone whispers beside you. Tamara walks to greet her. Their embrace is wordless long. Her name is Manari. She hasn't brewed in years, not since her son died from an infection that even the strongest beer couldn't cure. She stepped away from the brewing pit that day and never returned, passed her jars to younger hands, refused to teach, refused to taste. Until now, you learn she was once the village's most revered brewer, known for her intuition, her memory, and her refusal to write anything down. The beer listens to breath, not ink, she'd say. People came from other villages to drink her mixtures when fevers ran high or spirits ran low. And now, for reasons she keeps to herself, she's back. Tamara offers her a bowl from the latest batch, an honest, healthy brew, gently tart, with the faintest citrus edge from dried peels added at fermentation. Manari sniffs, sips, closes her eyes. You all hold your breath. She nods once, and then for the first time in years, she walks to the brewing pit. The village shifts around her like sand around a stone, quiet, reverent. She doesn't speak, just kneels beside a fresh jar and runs her hand along the rim, like reacquainting herself with an old friend. Then she begins to hum. It's low, tuneless, and rough, but it cuts through the air like wind through grass. You feel it in your chest. A few others begin to join in softly. Tamara hands her a paddle. She stirs clockwise, of course, and the hum builds. The jar begins to fizz. Not violently, not too fast, just right. You step closer, and she gestures for you to kneel. You do. She dips the paddle again and offers it to you, not to stir, but to watch. You see this line, she says, pointing to a faint ring in the foam. That means the grain was roasted just enough to crack, not burn. If it was higher, the jar would be stubborn. If lower, the brew would be thin. But here, this is memory. Her voice is a gravel road, but each word is clear. Everyone listens. You realize you're witnessing something rare, knowledge being passed without ceremony, just quietly, freely, after years of silence. She spends the day walking from jar to jar, giving small corrections, shaking heads, pointing out bubbling patterns and mold spots that mean something to her but require a lifetime of brewing to decode. No lectures, just looks, nods, approval, or not. At one point, she picks up a ladle and drinks from one of Tamara's experimental blends, a batch fermented under fig leaves and stirred with bamboo instead of clay. She pauses, then smirks. Still young, she says, but it wants to learn. You begin to understand something else, too. Historians still argue whether the preservation of this knowledge was oral, ritualistic, or just practical repetition. But what you see now is all of it at once. It's not that the Nubians didn't record their methods. They recorded them in people, in habits, in smells and sounds, and the sacred silence after a good jar is tapped. That evening, Manari sits near the fire with a bowl in her lap, gazing into the flame. You sit beside her. Do you miss it? You ask. She sips, doesn't answer. Then the beer doesn't miss me. It waits, until I'm quiet enough to hear it again. You nod, even though you're not entirely sure what she means. The fire crackles. The stars appear one by one. The jars breathe in their quiet corner, fermenting slowly beneath blankets of sand and moonlight. And the last of the brewers, no longer quite so alone, leans her head back and listens. The day begins without a rush. You wake slowly, wrapped in the warmth of both the rising sun and a quiet sense of finality. The brewing pit is quiet today. No jars bubbling over. No children splashing clay water at each other. The work has been done. The foam has risen. The beer has brewed. And for now, the village simply waits. You walk barefoot across warm sand and sit beside a half-buried jar, still cool from the night. You press your ear to its side, half expecting to hear Menry's whispered fizz again. But it's still. Resting. As if even the microbes are taking a breath. It's a day for stories. One by one, the villagers gather in a shaded circle beneath a stretched hide canopy. They bring bowls not full, just enough for sipping and memories. Someone starts with a tale about the 3-jug disaster, where a mischievous goat knocked over a whole batch before it finished fermenting, and the resulting brew gave everyone the sweats and the spins. Laughter ripples across the group. Another recounts a love story. 2 brewers from rival families, whose secret batches combined in one jar, created a foam so high it overflowed into legend. That jar, they say, still sits buried beneath the fig tree. Don't dig it up, warns Tamara, unless you want twins. You sip your own bowl, an easy, gentle beer, made from last week's careful batch. It's mellow and nutty, with a sourness that hums in the back of your throat, like a song you almost remember. It tastes like closure. A child asks Manari if she'll teach again. The old woman doesn't answer, but she reaches over and guides the girl's hand into a fresh bowl, showing her how to swirl the foam and read the tiny bubbles. When they gather to the right, she murmurs, "You wait." When they split in 3s, you stir. The girl nods. Her eyes are wide, but her hands are steady. That evening, the final jar is opened not to drink, but to pour. A libation returned to the earth. The village gathers at the edge of the fields, where the millet grows in rows that dance with every breeze. Tamara carries the jar. You carry the bowl. Manari walks behind her stick, leaving little trails in the sand. No speeches, just a moment of stillness. Tamara tips the jar. The beer flows golden and thick, pooling at the roots of the millet. A gift returned. The fields drink it in slowly, greedily, like they've missed it. You feel something shift, not in the earth, but in yourself. This has always been more than brewing. It's a ritual of care, a science of patience, a practice in letting things go at their own pace, foaming when they're ready, resting when they're not. The Nubians didn't just stumble into antibiotic beer. They brewed it with intention, guided by observation and intuition over lifetimes, over losses, over love. Historians may never fully decode their methods. Some say it was luck. Others insist on subconscious microbial selection. But watching these people move, laugh, and live around their jars, you know it was something more. They weren't just making beer. They were making meaning. That night, under a violet sky brushed with stars, you lie back beside the fading fire. The village is quiet now. The jars are sealed. The air smells of wood smoke, soil, and faintly sweet grain. You exhale long and low, and you dream of foam. The fire has gone out now, and the stars above blink slow and soft like they're tired too, The night hums gently. No more chatter, no more footsteps, just the distant murmur of wind slipping through dried millet stalks. You're still lying there. Your body gently sun-warmed your thoughts, quiet and full. The last of the jars is sealed, its surface brushed with clay dust and fig ash. You saw it happen. No rush, no ceremony, just a final pat from Minari's hand, and a knowing glance between her and Tamara. There was nothing more to be done, and nothing less. All around you the village breathes, not with noise, but with presence. Even the animals seem to know that now is the time for stillness. The old dog curled beside your feet sighs in his sleep. Somewhere far off a frog chirps twice, and then falls silent. The night holds everything in its soft palms. And you just rest. You let your mind drift back to the first sip, the sour surprise, the fizz on your tongue, the endless jars, the mold, the foam, the fig leaves, the crocodiles. You think of how they brewed healing into routine, turned patience into medicine. You wonder what modern life would look like if we did the same. If we trusted slowness, if we let things ferment in their own time. The wind is soft now, like breath, like lullaby. Your bowl is empty. Your heart is full. You let your eyes close, and the last thing you feel is the warmth of the earth beneath you, steady, and old still humming the same song it's always sung. Sleep well.